Good morning, Warrior Nation. This is Coffee with Rich, and back again for round two is Dr. T.C. Fuller. Good morning, T.C.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm doing better than I deserve. While we wait for folks to jump on, I'm going to go ahead and get this set up here.
I feel like I should keep talking so you know that I haven't dropped off.
Let's see. Where is the video? Oh, goodness. We got 27 already. Good morning, folks. Welcome to everyone that's joining us this morning. Appreciate that. I'm trying to get myself set up here. There we are. All right. Okay. Thank you for coming back on for round two, TC. I won't keep anyone waiting. Guys and gals out there in Warrior Nation, appreciate you joining me this morning. We're going to do some introductions here in just a moment. Most of you will recognize Dr. T.C. Fuller on from his last appearance about 4 weeks ago. TC, hope you're doing well this morning, sir.
I am, sir. Thank you for asking.
Good. Hey, as always, the sponsor of today's Coffee with Rich is the AmericanWarriorSociety.com. Please check that out. We have everything and anything you need for your self-defense needs. Let's see who's on this morning. Oh my goodness. Will Parker, Tiny, Rasmic, Matt, Doug, Jared, Gene. If you're a coin member, let me know what your coin number is and where you're at this morning. Hope you're staying safe. Roger Barber is on. Roger and I were in the Marine Corps together. Jim is on. Jeff, Derek, 27 folks on this morning. TC, I've got a few questions. I got like a lightning round for you today. We're just going to kind of see where the show takes us. We got a couple of viewer questions, but other than that, I want to start right out of the gate, man, with something off the wall. What's the most realistic tactics or war movie you've ever seen?
Oh, tactics or war movie? Oh, good Lord. Well, as it happens, I'm kind of a movie nut, so you've kind of walked into it here. The one that hit me the hardest was probably Saving Private Ryan, and that was the intro. Because that was just ugly. I've never been on the receiving end like that, but I've dished it out like that, and it's just I can't imagine to be a whole lot of fun. And I've only seen that movie once. I couldn't watch it a second time, for whatever reason. Weapons handling, you've got some really good movies of late. Since Heat, they've really kind of upped the game. The Way of the Gun. Some of them are pretty accurate too. Like you'll recall Jarhead, the pre-combat stuff where they're waiting in the desert. I mean, you remember what that was like. You're just bored out of your mind. You're running around in mop gear everywhere thinking you're going to get scudded and, nerve agent. So there's pieces of that. Of course, the basic training stuff from Full Metal Jacket, it was a little bit before my time, so we didn't have the same level of corporal punishment that you see in that movie, but the nonstop amazing command of the language and stream of abuse from the drills. It hits everybody who's been to basic training, I think, pretty well. So there's kind of a vast and varied selection if you really want to get into it. It's kind of let's sit down over dinner and talk about pieces of movies that I've seen, and you've seen that we can bond over.
I tell you, man, I think those are excellent selections. Heat, phenomenal movie. It's amazing to think that. I think that movie came out in 1995. And it is still amazing today to watch that movie. And Saving Private Ryan, I'm the same way. I watched it once. I had a very visceral reaction to it in the movie theater when it first came out. I didn't think that would happen. But like you said, the opening scenes was just hellishly carnage, and I couldn't imagine it. And Jarhead, it's funny. Did you read that book?
I have not. And it's kind of embarrassing to have to admit.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I remember when I was a chief warrant officer, there was two captains and they were both trying to read the book and they're like, hey man, here, I can't finish this thing. I read it and they're like, what'd you think? I said, I thought it was freaking awesome. And they're like, that's what? And I said, well, look, man, you never were a Lance Corporal. That's why you don't get this book. I mean, it's written from a perspective of that guy, and I thought it was highly accurate, and I thought the movie did a pretty good job showing a lot of the stupid crap, the hurry up and wait, and the mind games of the whole thing. And no, I agree. And The Way of the Gun, there's a forgotten classic.
Yeah. Hey, you know, Tom Cruise's handling of a firearm in Collateral is outstanding. You know, even Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, their weapons handling is really spot on too. And I enjoy that. I mean, I'm like anybody else. You know, I start watching a movie that isn't accurate with that sort of thing, and I start nitpicking and I throwing popcorn at the screen, and that it's just me.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, the reason I'm asking this Dr. Fuller what he thinks is the best war movie or the best tactical movie is because T.C. Fuller is a retired FBI agent, former Army officer, infantry officer, EOD officer, FBI firearms trainer, etc., extraordinaire. And we're going to dig in and get his thoughts on some things and talk about some of the things he did. But I'm still in my lightning round, TC. Here's the next question.
Shoot.
You can only carry one handgun. Don't you love those questions?
I do. We're talking about my current use situation right now.
Either like, you don't know if you're going to deploy again to tomorrow, or you're going to take the kids to a soccer game. You know what? You can only carry one handgun. What would it be?
Glock 17.
Ooh,
and I say that for my use case, because it's not a pretty gun. I mean, and I remember when I first got in the FBI, I was not a 9mm guy. I was not a Glock guy. Right? They were fairly new back then. They were, the tactical Tupperware gun, and nobody liked them. And I went to the FBI, and I was a 1911 guy. And it's rumored that I own several 1911s. Whether that's true or not, who's to say? But the thing about a Glock, and I learned this, first at the academy, shooting it all the time. It was first a 40 cal. It was what I was initially issued. It goes bang when you press the trigger. It's hard to break. I've seen them broken, but I've also seen them function with a snapped locking block, with pins missing. They just run. And that's, in my mind, the key attribute of a sidearm is that it goes, when you expect to hear a bang, you get a bang. You don't want to hear a click, right? Because that's probably the worst case scenario. You never need a gun until you desperately need a gun.
Yeah.
And, whereas I'm not going to poo-poo the 1911 or I'm going to poo-poo any of the other guns, but, some of those guns that are out there they're like Formula One race cars, right? If you're going to drive them around in circles, oh, Rich, you locked up on me. But it's a good picture of you. If you're going to run around in circles and stop and pit every 10 or 15 laps, and clean it and buff it and wipe it with a diaper and speak softly to it, then it'll run great. But it's not the car you want to drive from Maine to Los Angeles in, right? With the kids in the backseat.
Yeah.
And I choose a 9mm because I've been known to discuss pretty heavily lately, the 9mm is an outstanding round as it's being manufactured today. It's easy to find. It's fairly ubiquitous. You can get it anywhere. So for me, in my world right now, the Glock 17 would be the way to go. Plus, I've got, well over 100,000, 150,000 rounds through that particular platform, or the Glock 34. So I'm comfortable with it.
Hey, guys and gals out there in Warrior Nation watching this morning, thank you for being on with us this morning. Thank you for those that are watching the replay. Please like and share. Folks that need to see this content, I appreciate it. So we'll take a quick share break and give you guys an opportunity to share this content. I'll say good morning to Mr. Doug Lightfoot, Jay Fujimoto. Good morning, sir. You're out there in Hawaii. It is extremely early where you are, sir.
Jeez, no doubt.
Yeah. Joseph, good morning. Mark, good morning. Karen, good morning. Vince, good morning. Lots of folks on this morning. Rudy, good to see you. Mr. Ken Milton, Dr. John Eden. Sir, I need to get you on Coffee with Rich one morning. I have to talk to you about that offline. Okay, back at it. So I agree with you 100% on the Glock 17. Do you remember the first time you saw a Glock? What were your initial impressions, and when and where was that, if you remember?
First time I saw one was probably in a movie, probably Die Hard 2, maybe. First one I actually handled was at the FBI Academy in 1996, 7. It was issued item, and that was the first time I really kind of handled it. So they've been Quantico.
1997, huh? That's amazing. I mean,
getting further and further in the past the older I get.
Well, I bought my first Glock in 1992, coming off of my 3rd deployment, because when I went to a high-risk personnel course up at Quantico Weapons Training Battalion, the instructors were running those, and like you said, tactical Tupperware, man, I had never seen anything like it. And I was like, how come I've never heard of this before? And they raved about it, and I ran out and bought one and been a Glock guy ever since.
Yeah, they work. I mean,
it's hard to beat them.
A lot of HRT guys when I was in Afghanistan were carrying, their tricked out high-speed 1911s, and they found out pretty quickly that, it's a great gun as a backup piece when you're kicking a door in the States, where you've got it, you drive up, do your thing, you're gone. It's a 20-minute operation, but running around out in the woods with the dust and the sand and the mud and the blood and the crap, it's a little different animal. It's a little bit tougher to keep it up and running.
That's exactly right. I believe you've done some interrogations. Is that correct?
I have. I mean, in addition to the normal interrogations that you do in the FBI or in any law enforcement organization for that matter, I served as an interrogator in Guantanamo Bay shortly after the war started.
What can you tell us about that, TC?
Well, Guantanamo Bay looks a lot like Arizona, just with much, much bigger lizards and banana rats. Yeah, not fun. They're like rats the size of possums. They're just enormous.
Wow.
Yeah. Did you ever get to Gitmo while you were in?
No, thankfully.
A really nice outdoor, like a drive-in movie theater, but you walk in and sit down in bolted chairs. That's kind of fun. But as far as the interrogations go, you hear a lot about sort of the more invasive techniques, let's put it euphemistically, used by, I guess, one of the other government agencies. But tormenting people and torturing people is just, in my mind, it's kind of a rookie's game. You perhaps if you want to find out, hey, is there a machine gun nest behind that tree back there? That might work, I suppose. But for what we were doing, long-term deep exploitation of what these guys knew, it just wasn't really a wise approach. Beyond the fact that none of the FBI personnel that were there were particularly comfortable with that concept. So no one ever asked us to do anything like that. And amongst ourselves, the conversation was always, look, anything we do can and will end up in a federal courtroom. And I'm not going to do anything that's going to be any different than what I would do in the United States. So it was a lot of conversation. I mean, the worst thing I ever did to somebody down there was I put them in a wobbly chair and I turned the air conditioning down to about 67 degrees. I may have occasionally eaten a cheeseburger in front of them and offered them one if they gave me some information. You'd be amazed, just like with criminals here in the States, you'd be amazed at what you could get out of a guy for a double cheeseburger. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. There's a guy that, is willing to give up his whole tribe, for some fries and a burger.
Wow.
But they did. It was kind of funny.
So, have you ever seen an interrogation on TV that was anywhere close to what you experienced at Gitmo?
No. But I will say this about that. The type of interrogations that we did were more like what you would see on Law and Order, really than anything that I've seen on television. Because of course in the movies, what you see depicted is more invasive, more, torture. And that a lot of times has more to say about the producer's political views than anything else, in my opinion. It's rarely shown from the information garnered from someone who actually did that sort of work. Do I deny that those invasive techniques were used? No, I don't, because I wasn't there. I don't know. Somebody might have done it somewhere. I can say emphatically it was never done in my presence or even where I heard about it. So what I've seen in movies has always been, waterboarding and torture and whatnot. I just never saw it. There was a civilian running around in Afghanistan when I was over there that is an interesting story, probably too long for this particular broadcast, but he was pretending to be a special forces sergeant major and had snowed a lot of the military, and he had a camera crew following him around. and he was being filmed. And his idea was, I'm going to sell this back, my personal hunt for Osama bin Laden. And he was going to sell the video back to, some major network, which of course none of them did buy it. But the Afghan police eventually arrested him because he was snatching people up and waterboarding them.
Oh gosh!
And he ended up in an Afghan prison and died a few years later. Go figure.
Yeah,
that's a whole nother story. But and I did see his videos, and he was actually waterboarding people.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, didn't bode well for him.
We got a couple of questions that came in last night, TC. One of them is from Gerald, and Gerald says, could you describe your hardest day and your best day in your career?
Well, hardest day. There's a bunch, right? Anybody who's been in law enforcement is going to have hard days, right? 9/11 was a hard day. The 2 weeks after 9/11 were hard days, but that's not, unique to me. Anybody who was on the job that day, and in that time frame, that was rough. That was really rough. You lose friends, right? You have friends that die on the job. You have friends that kill themselves. The suicide endemic amongst veterans and law enforcement is epidemic. It needs to be addressed on a national level. So I certainly had plenty of friends that passed while I was in. Probably my most difficult day professionally was I worked crimes against children for a lot of years. About 10 years, I worked a lot of crimes against children. And that, as a general statement, is a difficult line of work. Kudos to those who are still out there fighting that fight. I had, in the 10 years I worked at, probably hundreds of cases, and I saw lots of evidence, and I talked to lots of victims, and that's always hard, is talking to the victims of that sort of crime. But there was one in particular that she was 9 years old, and her uncle had been abusing her and videotaping it. And I got through all that evidence okay, but at one point I had to watch the forensic interview conducted by a child protective services worker immediately after we identified her and got her the help the beginning of the help she was going to need. And watching that interview, it was about an hour and a half long, was just absolutely heart-wrenching. Just watching her go through what had happened to her, incident after incident with alarming details. She was playing with a doll the whole time. That one really, really stuck with me. And to this day, it gives me it's hard to think about. But I can't imagine there's anybody that's watching this that was former law enforcement or that knows someone who's former law enforcement that doesn't have several stories like that, whether they're on the job for a year or 20. There's just a few things stick, right? You throw a handful of mud against the wall, some of it's going to stick, and some of that stuff sticks. The best day of my job career, there were some good ones. When I put that little girl's uncle away for almost 30 years, that was a good day.
Yeah.
There were, plenty of people that got put away for long periods of time. That was the nice thing about being a Fed, right? We brought a federal hammer down on people that desperately needed it. I met my wife on the job. I met her on a shooting range, and I later proposed to her on that same shooting range at Quantico. So that was a pretty good day. Both of those were pretty good days. But probably professionally fulfilling, the best day I had was I put a guy on the top 10 list and put him on America's Most Wanted 2 times, for those of you old enough to remember that show. And we caught him. We caught him out in Los Angeles. And we caught him based on a tip from America's Most Wanted. And the person that gave him up was a woman that, her annual salary was probably 20 grand a year, 25 grand a year. And a lot of folks may not know it, but when you put somebody on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, it automatically ups your amount you can give as a reward to 50 grand to start. Bin Laden had $1 million on his head, for example. But right off the bat, there's a $50,000 kitty that you can draw from. So I was able to give her a $30,000 check.
Nice.
That was pretty cool. And, when you get money from the FBI like that, because you're a source, unlike what the movies will tell you, we don't give up our sources. We work very, very hard not to burn our sources. And part of that is we don't report to the IRS the money we give you, because they would have to, identify you as a source, right? Why did the FBI give you this money?
All right.
So you have to have a conversation with the person and say, look, this money is taxable, but we can't tell the FBI you have it, or the IRS that you have it. So you need to do the right thing and tell the IRS that you just got this great big fat check and pay them taxes on it. Of course, 99% of the people go, oh, sure, I'll be happy to do exactly that. So that was a lot of fun giving her that money. Writing that paperwork out to give her that money was a lot of fun. So that was probably a pretty good day for me.
That is a cool day. What did the guy do to get on the FBI's most wanted list, TC?
He was the second pedophile that we ever put on the list. The first one was a guy that had been a drummer for a famous rock band, or keyboardist, and we caught him in Thailand. And my guy was the second pedophile ever put on the list, and he was, I think, America's most wanted 700th capture, as they told me at the time.
Wow.
I have no knowing, but yeah, he was not a nice guy. He was molesting and producing child pornography and publishing it. And, yeah. So
hell's not hot enough for those people.
No, it's not. So that's always rewarding, though, to put those guys away. It's tough to look at the evidence, but it's rewarding to put them down.
Yeah. Dr. Dan Hull asks, you're carrying a knife in the photo of you standing in Osama bin Laden's former house. That's put that photo out of you last night, TC, when you were in Afghanistan. It says, what are your thoughts on carrying the knife as you have it versus someone accessing that knife as you have it if you go hands-on? Can you answer that?
So the concern is, I assume, for the knife I have across my chest in that photo. Yep. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I get the question. The short answer is I wasn't concerned about somebody taking that knife away from me and stabbing me with it. It's a logical concern. I see where you get it, but I wasn't in domestic law enforcement. That knife, by the way, was a special knife made for me by RJ Martin up at Martin Sight Knives. That thing to this day is razor sharp. I was using it for DNA collection, let's say, because a lot of times we needed to identify bodies bodies, because people, we just do cheek swab, but sometimes you needed to collect DNA in a hurry in a combat zone. Bullets flying around and there's a guy there. We need to know who that was. You snap a quick picture and collect some blood, hair, and skin, and move on. And that knife was like a scalpel. It still is. It's in my gun safe now. But I wasn't terribly concerned about it being taken away from me, because at that point I already had infantry experience, combat experience from the Gulf War. So I knew that my chances of bumping into a guy and wrestling around with him on the ground were pretty freaking slim. I was also never going to be anywhere alone. I was surrounded by a bunch of really hard dudes with really bad attitudes. And, one of their priorities was making sure that at that point, that my mid-30s, the old FBI guy didn't get himself got. So that wasn't a big concern of mine. Plus I had an M4, I had a Glock 17. I think I was carrying 4 knives at the time, including my Leatherman. But I'm kind of a knife guy. But they were tools. They were tools of what I was using, and I needed them. The knife on my hip was a Strider, one of their BFKs, I think. And that thing was like a sharpened manhole cover. I mean, it was like an E-tool with a blade on it. You couldn't break that thing with 5 fat guys in a team of Clydesdales couldn't have snapped that way. I understand his question. I think in domestic law enforcement, I wouldn't do it, 1, because the optics are bad, and 2, because you just tend to work a lot closer with people, right? I mean, you don't get to be 30 feet away from somebody and say, sir, can you throw me your driver's license?
Right.
That's not how it goes. So they're going to be up close and personal. So I hope that answers the good doctor's question.
No, it did. Tell me about, how did you end up in Afghanistan? I think the first time that I heard that from you, I was like, what in the world is the DOJ sending an FBI agent to Afghanistan? How did that even come about?
Yeah, my first rocket attack, I really considered, why am I here? I could be at home doing something much more entertaining. It was kind of interesting. The year prior, I was in Gitmo. And so I got down there and I kind of got in that world. So the following year, I got a phone call at my desk, sitting there, working cases like I did. Said, hey, look, heard about you down in Afghanistan, or down in Gitmo, like to send you to Afghanistan. I'm like, okay. It occurred to me later that getting FBI agents to go was a little bit tricky, because 1, you needed people with some level of experience in that environment, and 2, they had to be in a position to go, and 3, they had to be willing to go. And of course, 4, the bureaucracy and their bosses had to let them go. So there was that each one of those wickets sort of shrinks your available pool. So I got the call and I went, but the reason that they were sending us over there, which I think might be kind of a underlying foundation for your question, was when you send soldiers or Marines to go into a compound, let's say, and you tell them, hey, look, we need a prisoner and we need all the documentation, computers, anything that's in there. We need all of that. And they will salute you and say, Roger out. And they'll go in there and they'll kill people and break things. And they'll come out with a guy with a bag over his head and zip ties on around his wrists, probably a little bruised and worse for wear, not undeservedly, and a bag, a laundry bag full of paperwork, right? That's what you'll get. And some of it will be burned and some of it will be bloody and what have you. And that's great for tactical intelligence purposes in the military, because that's how they're trained to do it, right? You get that training from basic training on. It doesn't work as well in federal court because I need to know that this book came from that guy's pocket in this room at this time, right? I need to be able to show a chain of custody. I need to be able to enter it into evidence and run it all the way back. And that was what we were trying to accomplish. We were trying to put people in the United States and elsewhere around the world into prison for associating with these guys in Afghanistan, if they needed to go, obviously. So you needed to have somebody that knew how to conduct those searches, to create a chain of evidence that could swear to a chain of evidence that could be then provided back into a federal court in Sterling, Virginia, 3 years from now. It's a little bit more difficult to take a Marine private or an Army private and expect them to make that transition. So they sent us over there to do that and to do the intelligence gathering from sources. We started running sources outside the wire, and we also started doing interrogations outside and inside the wire, all of which are skill sets that it's just unreasonable to expect of an infantryman in any branch of the service. So they would send us over to do that sort of work. So it was interesting. When I was there was very few of us in country at the time. So, one night you'd be out with the Rangers. The next night you'd be out with Special Forces. 3 days later, you'd be out with the Marine Corps. You just bounced all over the country. Got a little tiring because, a unit might go out and hit a compound tonight. They'll do a week's worth of workup on it, intelligence gathering, flying drones, talking to sources, hit a compound. Maybe that will spiral off into a couple more compounds, a lot like drug busts work here in the United States, right? You kick a door, you grab a guy, he coughs up his dealer, you go grab that guy, you roll up a bunch of people in one night. But then they'll recover back to base and they'll spend a few days, rest, refit, and go out and hit again. We wouldn't spend that time resting and refitting. We'd come back and they'd say, okay, you're in Kandahar, we need you up in J-Bad or Sadabad or you're Bagram, wherever you're going, and you just jump a flight and go and go and go. So it was an intense time, and it was an interesting sort of chain of events that got you to be there.
Let me ask you, yeah, man, let me ask you a specific question on that. So once you got in country, did your normal Department of Justice, requirements for deadly force change to in-theater ROEs or what?
Yeah, that was never really clear. So yeah, when I was there, I'm sure it got briefed up as it became a more developed theater. It became a lot more clear. The good news is anytime that, I pressed the trigger on my weapon and I wasn't on a range, it was because there were bullets flying back at me.
Yeah.
It was, and I didn't have to, I wasn't clearing compounds. I mean, I would go in behind the guys who were clearing compounds. So there were times I'd be in one room interrogating a guy or searching a guy, and there are people fighting in the next room over. Gunfights going on right next door. Yeah. So, and you know how that works, right? So when you're you're in a building, somebody comes around a corner, you shoot or don't shoot based on domestic law enforcement ROE, that matters. Whereas clearing a building in the military, you're going to throw in a frag grenade into a room. It's going to detonate. You're going to go in, you're going to machine gun anybody who's still twitching, and then you're going to move on. You assume a lot more risk for collateral damage in a military operation than you can as a domestic law enforcement officer. But I was never on that edge where it was a big deal. If that makes sense. I mean, yeah. So anytime I had to shoot at somebody, go ahead.
No, I was going to say you brought up part of the reasons I'm asking that question. I mean, I've shot with you. I've seen you shoot. TC, you're an amazing shot, very accurate guy. So But I wonder, like, a hand grenade is indiscriminate, right? So I'm like, is
Right.
these DOG guys running around throwing frags and clearing buildings with tier 1 dudes or what?
Now, I can't speak for HRT. I can't speak for some of the other people that were there. I don't know what their rules of engagement were because I didn't serve with them. But yeah, that's what does they say? A bullet can have your name on it, but a hand grenade's more of a to whom it may concern kind of thing.
Yeah.
I was fortunate. I never got into that situation. I got to be honest. I would have probably defaulted back to law enforcement ROE, even though I had served in combat previously, in infantry combat previously. Things were a lot more up close and personal in Afghanistan than they were in the first Gulf War.
Oh, I'm sure.
Which should tend to make. I was a Bradley, platoon leader in the first Gulf War, so things that got closer than 500 meters, that was way too close.
Yeah. Hey, we got a question here from Doug Lightfoot. If you have a question for TC, go ahead and drop it in there. I've had him on now for about 30 minutes, and I don't want to keep him on all day. I want to be respectful of his time. Let's see. Doug says, question for TC. I know that based on your book, and if you could talk about your book briefly as you answer the question, TC, says your experience with video simulation for deadly force training wasn't very positive. What are your thoughts now based on new technology?
Well, video simulations for law enforcement now, I think, are much, much better. My experience with them was in the 90s, and my experiences weren't great, mostly because of me, not because of the technology. The technology didn't tend to be the issue. Those of us who are old enough remember when that technology first came out, you'd hit a specific split points in the video, and if you did X, it would go one way. If you did Y, and it was based on an instructor pushing a button. That could be a little bit, stilted. In my case, I think what I describe in the book, which is about, by the way, to answer your other question, how to improve the methodologies by which we teach law enforcement officers to administer deadly force. How's that for a mouthful? My experience was, okay, first video shows up. I go in. I see I'm dealing with a guy, and then I see somebody down a hallway in a silhouette with what looks to be the silhouette of a handgun. I turn, drop the gun, and I mag dump the guy. All right, go to slide lock. Well, and of course, after the fact, they're like, hey, next time you say these things, give them time to actually drop the gun. You can't say drop the gun, bang, 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 bang. I'm like, okay, fine. Lesson learned. Don't shoot too fast. So the next video I get is some woman who decides that suddenly she's going to channel her inner Bruce Lee. And I say, FBI, don't move. And she comes at me and attacks, and I start shooting. But of course, by now she's in the air doing her flying sidekick. We're past the split point in the video, and the screen goes black with a red outline. And they're, you're dead, little bunny foo-foo. And I'm like, next time they're like, well, you got to shoot faster. So I'm going like, yeah, what? Okay. That all being said, I think video now is outstanding. I think the trainers are better at using it. They've got 25 years of experience now. I think it is an outstanding methodology by which to train. But you have to train. I mean, I've worked with Andrew Branca and using video simulators for people, wherein he is training them on the use of what he's just taught them regarding the law of self-defense in a scenario. And then I would come in and function as the interviewing officer immediately after the fact. Okay, you've now killed somebody. Tell me what you saw. Hit them with, why did you do what you did? What did you see? And it's always interesting to see how badly people can fumble that because of this, just the relatively low amount of stress that you see in the video or that you get from the video. But you do get stress in the video. Grossman's pretty clear on the importance of stress inoculation. As instructors, I think we see that is helpful often. And the video can be really, really helpful in that. I think as part of a holistic approach to your training on deadly force, video simulators with good trainers attached can be very, very helpful.
Yeah, you and Andrew Branca came out for our American Warrior Society Warrior Camp probably about a year and a half ago, and I agree with you. Having Andrew run them through the simulator, and then the student would immediately face away from it, and you would walk them through the steps, and the class is watching the video, but the person that just went through the shoot, this is for those that are watching. Then TC, you would start asking them questions about what did they see. And I remember there was one guy that could not remember talking to someone. He was entering his place of work. I don't know if you remember this, TC. And the scenario was he's entering his place of work and he's walking in a hallway and one of his coworkers is hiding under a desk. And they had this long conversation where he tells him where the bad guy is. And then you start interrogating the guy and he's like, well, how did you know what room he was in? And the guy's like, I don't know. I just knew. No, you had a conversation with somebody. It was so weird.
Yeah. And it speaks to what law enforcement officers see all the time is the fallibility of eyewitness testimony, right?
Yeah.
Especially under stressful situations. And that's just from a video, right?
Yeah.
That's not actually where your life is in danger. You're not in danger at all. But that video stress can be such that it really teaches you, hey, look, this is a real problem.
No,
I'm a fan.
No, I agree with you, man. I go back to my early law enforcement days. We had remember those round carousels? And we're on the range at night and they're shining it onto a big, like a sheet of plywood with some butcher block paper over it. And you're firing live rounds and the instructor's clicking the slide. So you see the progression of so that's how old school I am, bro. That's some low tech.
Yeah, I remember those days. That's way back in the day.
Yeah. Okay. I have a question for you, man. Because we've talked a little bit about modern law enforcement and stuff like that. I would ask you, man, what does the situation in Minneapolis teach us?
I was hoping we were going to get through this without talking about the unfortunate demise of Mr. Floyd.
Yeah.
What does it teach us? Well, I think it teaches us a lot. One thing it speaks to for me is I'm glad I'm retired. Mm-hmm. The law enforcement profession in this country has become much, much, much more difficult in the last 5 years, 10 years. And I'm very glad I'm out of that. I'd also like to point out that one of the things it should teach us is that for every case that you see like this, there are literally thousands of positive, nonviolent contacts between law enforcement and the citizenry every day. Hundreds of thousands to millions a year where cops never use any level of force or they arrest people calmly. No one gets hurt. No force is used. Cops do good things in our community every single day. And then when something like this happens, we get people with varying political agendas that will make the most out of it. I think it also teaches us that training is important. The mayor of Minneapolis over the last few years has very famously come out against better and stronger training for his law enforcement in that city. I think it's starting to show. I think you've also got a long-term problem up there between the community and law enforcement for a variety of reasons. I think there's enough ownership of that problem to go around for everybody. I think the officer involved his life is destroyed. Whether that's appropriate or not, my default setting is always pro cop. I will absolutely admit the optics on this are horrible. And, he may well have committed this murder. If he committed a murder, then, I'm sorry, screw you. You're going to prison and you should. If you're a murderer in a uniform, you're a murderer. But he may not have. I don't know. I've only seen the chunks of video that I've been provided. And I don't feel like I know enough about the situation to speak intelligently about that particular set of incidences. It's a very, very unfortunate that someone died. And in custody death is never, never, ever a good thing. Anybody who's not in law enforcement should be very clear that this isn't something that gets pushed under the rug. I mean, any law enforcement officer watching this that's ever been involved in a shooting, let alone actually killing, knows it's coming, right? At least looking at an internal investigation, probably a state investigation, maybe a federal investigation. It's going to be looked at left, right, up, down, backwards, forwards. It's going to be examined very thoroughly. If it's a cross-racial shooting in this day and age involving particular racial demographics, you can fully expect that the news media is going to jump on board, local leaders are going to jump on board, possibly national leaders are going to jump on board. I found that's never helpful, you know.
Yeah.
But I also think that if the state actors, in this case law enforcement, utilize the state's monopoly on deadly force on a citizen, it needs to be examined. You know, any killing obviously needs to be looked at hard, but I think law enforcement officers, we should be held to a higher standard. We're better trained, we're better supplied, we're better supported. We should be held to that better standard. So, you know, was this a case of bad policy? Probably. Was it a case of bad decisions? Probably. Bad decisions on the part of the decedent, bad decisions on the part of the police officer, bad decisions on the part of the surrounding police officers, more than likely. But I don't know. And I certainly don't want to sound like I'm saying he's innocent. I don't want to sound like I'm saying he's guilty. I don't know. But I think it's one of those things we're going to know a lot more about this when it's all said and done. And I'm hopeful that the mob mentality settles down. People stop hurting each other, stop burning down their own businesses. People in Hollywood, shut the hell up.
Yeah.
You know, nobody cares about your opinion. And frankly, it's not your neighborhood that's getting burned to the ground. All right. So you can sit there and you can fan the flames, but they're not coming to Brentwood or Hollywood and burning your Porsche. Yeah. You know, they're burning their own communities, and they're the ones that are going to have to live there a year from now, 6 months from now. The police are still going to be there trying to help these people 6 months from now, a year from now. And it doesn't help to fan these flames.
Yeah, I think for trainers, man, there's a lesson here as well. I remember I got hired to teach train the trainer defensive tactics course to a large metropolitan police agency. This would have been probably like around 2000, 2001. They brought me back a year later to teach like structural clearance, not really CQB, but you know, whatever. And as soon as I got there, the captain's like, "Oh, Mr. Brown, welcome back." I'm like, "Yeah, good to be back." And he says, "Oh, by the way, have you got your subpoena yet?" No. And he says, "Oh yeah, you're being, we had an officer that used one of the techniques you taught us on a handcuffed inmate. So just if you could show us in your training materials where it says, don't do that technique on a compliant handcuffed inmate, that would just, you know, clear all this up." I'm like, well, dang, man, I can't put everything in there. Where does common sense take over? Yeah. And I say that because, like in this instance, you know, if he applied his knee on his upper back, neck, wherever that region of the body was for that length of time on me, I would probably expire. So, I mean, where does common sense kick in? Because I'm sure the entire training department at in his agency is going to get drug into court for a long period of time, right?
Yeah, more than likely. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that I haven't put my knee in the back of somebody's head, but never.
I have too, right?
I mean, I've grabbed a few people overseas and done that, but I haven't sat there for 10 minutes, and I don't know how long this took place. So I'm not saying in this particular incident this is what happened. What I am saying is that is not an unusual technique to me,
right?
But I also am a big fan of let's get the bad guy in a car, get him out of here. We'll take care of the scene if we can. But I also have a much different set of experiences because I was a Fed, right? So I didn't have the experiences that a local law enforcement officer has. They tend to move with, things are breaking a lot faster. They tend to work on uncontrolled scenes a lot more. They don't have the luxury of saying, okay, we're gonna roll onto this apartment and we're gonna take over the street and we're gonna put agents all over the place with long guns and nobody's moving. I had that advantage, right? If I was going to go hit a house in the inner city, I could take a whole bunch of friends with guns. A lot of times cops can't do it. And I don't know how many officers were on scene here. I just can't speak to it, but I think you're absolutely right. As trainers, you've got to be aware. And this is also an important point. Write your training down, right? You need to have a written curriculum. There's a lot of us that are, hanging shingle that are single party trainers or, two-party trainers like you and Mike. Having a written curriculum is critical. Masada Ayub, I've actually seen him teach classes using videotape, where it's like a 4-hour video, and that's his class.
Yeah.
And I laughed the first time I saw it, and then I realized, no, that's actually genius, because when something goes sideways and he gets subpoenaed, and they can say, "What did you teach?" He can say, "Well, let's go to the videotape," and he just hands over the tape, and he's done. Well, I guess it's a CD now or a thumb drive, but it shows you exactly what was taught and what wasn't taught. And it kind of removes a lot of that onus from you as the trainer.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. My brother Jeff says, what exactly does TC do now? Boy, that is a question right there.
Besides, try to keep my wife from killing me and chase around a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, I have my own business, the horusgroup.net, HORUS group.net. And I do kind of a smattering of a lot of things. It's a nice thing about being retired and being able to pay your bills without having to work is that I can do what I want to do. So I do security consulting. I do executive protection work. I'm a private investigator in North Carolina, so I'll do that sort of work. I'm working on additional books I need to finish because I'm real good at starting books. I'm tough in the clinch. So it's bringing things home that seems to be my problem. Kind of a smattering of stuff. And I've written my corporate charter in such a way that I can kind of pick and choose what I do. I do firearms instruction, but I tend to do kind of deep into the fiscal pool folks. I do people that are looking that might have, a lot of money and decide, okay, I want to learn to shoot, but I exist in a group of people that, my social connections are all kind of anti-gun. I don't want that word getting out, but I do want to be protected. And my wife is, wants to learn as well. So I do a lot of private and semi-private class instruction. I'll travel and do that. But a lot of my clients, they just don't want to have the world know that, yes, I play for this professional sports team and I have guns. They just don't want that word out. So that's kind of who I work towards. I'm not the guy that's going to, dress up in like a 511 catalog exploded on me and teach you how to kick doors in Basra. That's just not, I could teach that, but there are plenty of people that are much better at it out there teaching. So I will leave that to them. I hope that answers that question.
No, great. Any final questions for TC before we wrap it up? Thank you to the 52 people that are watching right now. And we've kept TC on here for almost 50 minutes. TC, thank you so much for your time.
Happy to do it, Rich. Always a pleasure.
Yeah. Gerald says, have you interviewed with anyone else lately that the folks here could go and watch?
Actually, you're the only guy I've ever done video with. There's the older American Warrior Show podcast that I did with Mike. Well, I guess it's back in 2018 now.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just did one with the guys over at Gun Jitsu.
Oh, yeah.
We discussed caliber selection, amongst other things. They kind of, it's like their lightning round is an hour-long lightning round, hour and a half long lightning round. But I did that, I guess, last month. So that one's out there as well. It's episode 13 or 14, somewhere in there. So that's my docket at this point, my claim to podcast fame.
Nice. This comes in from Doug Lightfoot, and Doug is a patrol lieutenant up in Ohio. Good morning, Doug. He says, something I tell anyone who is considering entering the LE profession is that he or she must train with firearms and self-defense on his or her own time and own dime every year throughout his or her career. Most agencies will not or cannot provide you with all the necessary training in these two areas that carry an extreme amount of civil and criminal liability. What do you think about that, TC?
He's absolutely right. I had a luxury in the FBI that, when I first got to my first office, every office has a principal firearms instructor. And I went to that guy as soon as I met him. I shook his hand. Hi, I'm, brand new guy, Bobby Bureau from the FBI. How many bullets can I shoot a year?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget his words. Good old Mark Permutica, wherever you are, Mark, go with God. He said, you just shoot. I'll tell you when you've shot too much. And he never told me I shot too much. And I would load case after case after case in the back of my car and take it back up to the wilds of Vermont. And I'd train and I'd train and I'd train. Because at the end of the day, law enforcement qualification is not designed to keep you alive in any agency I'm aware of. It's designed to insulate your parent agency from the inevitable lawsuit that's coming after a shooting. Whether you live or die, so they're going to get sued. And they simply need to be able to say they were compliant with state mandates and federal mandates on training, finding you training. So like when I was in Vermont, the state police up there got 34 rounds a year to qualify. 34 rounds a year. That's all the state gave them. And I used to laugh. I'd tell the head firearms instructor, I said, the first time I'm involved in a shooting and there's a state trooper within a half a mile, I says, I'm getting paid because I'm going to sue and I'm going to ask first off for your training records, and then I'm going to publish them in the paper. I said, and somewhere along the line, somebody in state police headquarters is going to write me a check. We can laugh about it, but the reality is they don't provide enough training. Nowhere. I mean, in the FBI, we had to qualify 4 times a year. I got lots of bullets. A lot of people didn't want to spend the time. But, Jeff Cooper pointed out years ago that people will train harder for a little tin plastic cup at an IDPA match or an IPSC match or USPSA match than cops will train to save their own lives. And Doug's point is well made. I mean, it's a struggle for every firearms trainer I've ever met in any agency. You've got your hardcore people that'll train and they'll shoot a lot and they'll take every bullet that you drop. Then you've got the people that can't be bothered. They come out the minimum number of times, they shoot the minimum number of rounds, and they leave. And that's always a struggle. And selling those people on the idea that, look, this is your life and possibly my life you're training to save is a struggle as old as time. And I wish him well and others well in fighting that battle. Because I fought it for 20 years, and I know other people are fighting it to this day.
Yeah. Let's see. This one comes in from Penny. Penny says, are you and Andy doing any projects together?
I assume Andy Bronca.
Perhaps.
We started, assuming it's Andy Bronca, we started a fiction book 8 years ago before his law of self-defense took off. And I don't know that we've ever finished it. So we're working on that, and perhaps it'll be published posthumously. And then we've talked about collaborating on a lot of stuff. He's really, his bandwidth is full with law of self-defense, as well as he also has 2 small children at home. And he lives out in Colorado now. I live in North Carolina. It's a little harder for us to link up. But we're always talking. We talk a few times a month, and I'd love to come up with something that's mutually beneficial financially that we could do together. So if you have any ideas, Penny, go ahead and throw them in the show notes.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, TC, any parting comments? I kept you on here almost an hour, man. I'm sorry about that.
Not at all. No, I really appreciate it, Rich. Thank you for having me on. If people want to get a hold of me, they can certainly do so through thehorseGroup.net. They can probably find me on Facebook without too much difficulty, and they can always shoot you a note that I'm sure you would be happy to pass on to me. Easy to find in that regard. Hope things are going well with you and Miss Lisa up there in the mountain. And thank you again for having me on your show.
Thank you, brother. Wait a minute, we got a question just jumped in here from Josh. Let's see. It says, I never understood people like that. I just left a federal agency and had 3 officers that asked if they could just not carry and turn in their guns.
Yeah, and there's people out there. To me, that's a question you probably should, figure out before you pick up the gun and put it on, before you put the badge on.
Well, that's in your book. I mean, that's like one of the first chapters, is it not? Like, we need to make sure use deadly force. If they can't or won't, then
there are plenty of people out there that are very good people that are incapable of hurting other folks, and that's fine. I got no problem with that. Yep. I have a problem with it when you say you can, and then when I need you to, you don't, or you can't, or you won't. That becomes a problem, because as I've said before, 2 a.m. when some biker is beating your brains out in a back alley with a tire iron is not the time to decide that you're a pacifist. The time to make that decision is before you become law enforcement. I mean, there's plenty of great jobs out there that you can do instead. You can be all kinds of law enforcement support jobs that don't involve being sworn with a badge and a gun, if that's where your particular calling is. But if you're not equipped to do it, you're not equipped to do it. It doesn't make you a bad person. I'm never going to be a power forward for the Bulls. I'm never going to be a fighter pilot. It doesn't make me a bad person. I'm not capable of doing those jobs. I've used the pediatric oncologist example in the past, right? I'm glad there are people that can do that job. I am not that person. I couldn't do it. I just am not mentally and emotionally equipped to do that job. So Josh is right. There are people in the law enforcement community that find out that they can't kill another human being only when it's time for them to try and kill another human being, and it costs them their lives or the lives of people around them. And the stakes are too high. You can't do that.
I 100% agree. And I think that's a beautiful note to end on. TC, so people can find you at horsegroup.net. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. They certainly can.
And if they want to find your book, where do they need to go?
Well, there's a link on my webpage, or they can go to Amazon. That's always good. You can get in touch with me directly, and I'll be happy to sell you one. The only way to get a signed one is to get a hold of me directly. I'll be happy to sign it and send one out. I think the last show, a couple folks reached out. I got them signed books. Or Amazon, right? Because they're like the board; they've absorbed everybody. You can get anything you want from Amazon. So,
well, thank you so much, TC. Guys and gals out there in Warrior Nation, please stay safe because the fight is coming. Be ready.